Okay, in this video, what we want to see is the basic steps to creating any project. It's going to be a new project, so I can either use this shortcut right here or come up here and say File, New Project. Either is good. So, Create New Project. These are the typical settings for everything we're doing. It's embedded, meaning we're going to be using a computer chip to write the program to, and it's a standalone. We need to tell it what chip we're using. We're going to use the PIC 18F2620. There we are. And click Next. And it wants to know which hardware tool we're using. For us, the choices are either going to be the PIC-Kit 3 or the simulator. Right now we're going to work with the simulator because I don't have anything plugged in and we got to get used to writing C programs. When we're a little more comfortable with writing programs, we'll be loading them onto the PIC and seeing if they work. So right now it's the simulator. And then we tell it which compiler we're using, which is the XE8. Next. Okay, so we want to give the project a name. And over here, it's already being directed to a project location. You can create your own project location. Right now, that project location is from my Physics 1600 projects is empty except for this folder of useful functions that we supply you with. So we're going to give it a name. It's our first project, so why not call it first? You'll notice that this is going to create a folder called FirstX. And down here, the language set that we want to use is UTF-8. That's a bit of a universal font and should prevent a few problems later on. It's not crucial that you have it set to this. Okay, so there's not much change here, except over here in this projects pane, it's created it. And if I pull this over here, you'll see that there's now a folder called first.x. It's empty. We created the shell of a project, but there are no files in it. So the first thing we want to do in our source file is add either an existing item, or in our case, we want to create a new C main file. In C, all functions start at the main function, and you can only have one main function. So this is just creating a main function. The name we're going to call it, instead of new main, that sounds boring, how about first main? And click Finish. And there, it's created it for me. When I created it, a few standard include files, which we won't need for a little while. And here it is, an empty function. This is the main. There's no real lines of code. When it finishes, it just returns. We can actually build this now. And here are two icons, build and clean, that when I create this, comes through, and down here in this pane, the output or task output pane, it tells me it worked. There are some messages, right? Some advisories, right? Little thing telling me that if I upgrade, I could have better optimization, which means buying a more expensive version of this free project, and some default settings that it's using. None of that's a problem for us. Okay? So it's created. If I pull back the directories and look at first main, here's that file it just created. There's a whole bunch of other directories here, right, containing a lot of files that we are not particularly interested in. One of the files we are is this first.x.production.hex file. This is the file that when it's created gets loaded onto the PIC to make it operate. Okay, let's get rid of this. Now when we're doing these programs, there's a number of settings that we will typically want to use. And let's see if I can find some of them. First of all, there is run set the project configuration. And we're going to customize it, change it in other words. This is a big thing. It opens this window. And there's a couple of things we want to do. First, in the XC8 linker, in the memory model, it talks about the size of double and float. These are for decimal numbers. They're 24-bit. We're going to make them 32-bit because that will give us some extra precision in our calculations. We're going to apply that. In the simulator, there's an important setting. We want to know what speed the chip is operating at. And our chip, in the default mode, and we haven't made any changes, is 1 megahertz. It can operate a lot more slowly than that, down to about 125 kilohertz, up to about 32 megahertz. So right now we're using the default setting. If we change it, we'll have to come here and change it as well. As another thing we want to do is this UART1 IO options. We want to enable that, and we want it to enable to a window. These are pretty default settings that we're going to use most of the time. So when you start, make it a habit of getting these settings. So let's apply all those and say OK. I can rebuild, and again, no change. Hi. So we've been able to create our first project, just an empty single file project. Now, besides editing this file to do a bunch of things, we typically make use of code in other files, what we normally call library files. To access those files, we have to add them to the project. So we click on Add Existing Item. And in here, I'm just going to click on a couple of these files, select. And those files are libraries. So besides .c source files, there's a couple of header files. Okay. And here's 3 headers that I'll need. Save. That's it. I've increased the size of my project by adding these files. But I'm not accessing them here at all. We'll be talking about how I make use of the code that's in here a little later. If I build this project, builds, because essentially I haven't changed anything. Unless, of course, there had been some errors in those files I added. But they were checked a long time ago. So